One of the things I want to talk about today is that I really believe, and maybe you agree with me, that we're more alike than we are different. When you get to know people, people are people, right? All over the world, people are people. One of the reasons we have this theme called Everyday's Heroes is some of the brilliant work done by a man named Joseph Campbell. Anybody ever heard this man's name? Joseph Campbell. 5 of you. Well, we're going to do a little education. How about George Lucas? Ever heard of that guy? Okay, so George Lucas said he would never finish Star Wars without the insights from Joseph Campbell. He loved that guy. If you Google Joseph Campbell, you'll see a ton of stuff on him. But he wrote what was called the hero's journey. And he said that every human being is engaged in one story, which has very predictable parts to it. And he said that, that if you follow your bliss, doors open up. And he talked about the fact that every hero's story begins with the call to adventure. So we're going to talk about the call to adventure because I'm about to give you a call today that you'll either love it or you're going to hate it. There's nothing in the middle to this idea. But the call to adventure. Now, Dorothy, The Wizard of Oz is the classic hero story. It is classic. Dorothy wants to run away. Remember that. She wants to run away. She gets talked to go back home by who would become the wizard. He says, Annie M? I haven't seen the movie in a while. She is very upset. You got to go back. So she goes back. But what happens to her? She can't go back home, right? The house takes off. So she's got if you don't volunteer for the call to adventure that you know you should be doing, you will involuntarily be on this call to adventure. So I suggest we all listen carefully to what our heart's telling us and do that lest we get spun into the air. Now, your comfort zone is here. All the cool stuff happens outside of the comfort zone. Would you agree with this? Yes. I would suggest to all of us, if we don't want to get involuntary swept into the sky and land in munchkin land without having a choice about it, that we stretch ourselves every week to find one opportunity each week in your circles work where you're going to go talk to someone that makes you uncomfortable. I remember being asked to join some man to meet a billionaire in Chicago one day. And I thought, a billionaire, really? Okay. A little uncomfortable. Off I go. And he's saying to me, this was before Obama was getting elected, he said, have you talked to Senator Obama about all this? I said, nope, I'm amazed I'm having this conversation with you. He goes, how about Warren Buffett? Nope, haven't talked, well, no, I haven't talked to Warren. I can't remember having that conversation with Warren yet. But he said, this guy could pick up the phone and call both of them and make stuff happen, right? He's very comfortable in his own circle. When I met the first person to ever do circles, she said, how much money do you think I need to make? And I said, $10 an hour. This was in 1997. $10 an hour and health benefits. She walked away. A year later, had a job at $12 an hour with health benefits and told me that when I told her that $10 an hour, she thought, that guy is a fool. He's a complete fool. I don't want to do anything. I don't want anything to do with this. Because she could not see herself in that kind of a job and thought I was just pie in the sky about that. And isn't that true for all of us? When I talk to you today about this call to adventure that I want you to really seriously consider, many of you are going to walk away on the back of your mind somewhere going, that is one big fool up there, and I'm not following this. Well, my roots are here in Pittsburgh. I don't know if you know that, but I spent 4 years of my life here in Pittsburgh. Our family was dressed for success. Check this picture out. If I were to predict this family's future, I'd say, there's my sister. She's going to become a school teacher. I am clearly going to some prep school and then off to corporate America. My 2 brothers are heading to Vegas, and they're going to be blackjack dealers. Right? That's where they're going. You can't judge a picture, or you can't judge a future by a picture, and that's the case for all of us. We did very different types of things. But that was my comfort zone, being in this family, in the suburbs, et cetera, et cetera. I went to school at Kent State to become an architect. Some of you know this story. They were really convincing about not doing that I not do that. And I didn't know what to do. My world was about to go upside down. And when you're in a crisis, when you look back and think about the worst moment in your life, for some of us, and maybe for all of us, it could have very well been the best time of our life in terms of what it did to us, right? It defined us in a particular way. You know that people are coming into circles in crisis. They're coming in with their house spinning down on top of your program, and you are munchkin land. Am I right? Boom, in they come. Boom, in they come. All of this crisis. We need to celebrate this at some level. We need to let people know that this crisis you're in is A-okay. It may be the most defining moment of your life. For me, I would have been a lousy architect and probably would have had to change careers. It would have been awful later on. Instead, all this wildness happened to me in college. It was miserable. I was miserable. I didn't know what to do. And my house landed in a volunteer role at a homeless shelter. Literally, this guy told me, why don't you get your mind off your own problems and go see people that have real problems and go to a homeless shelter? I had to ask even what it was. What's a homeless shelter? I'm 18 from the burbs. I have no idea about poverty at all, nothing. And then I'm 5 miles, 6 miles away from my home in this homeless shelter, people in dire straits. It was so, it just was like landing in a whole different world. And I would never be doing this work if that hadn't been such a wonderful, terrible experience in college. If I had had a good experience, we wouldn't be doing this, we'd be doing something else. So, you're on the road now, you're in this adventure, you're meeting your allies, you're meeting your Tin Man, the Cowardly Lion, you're meeting the Scarecrow. These are people that are going to help you figure this out. And one of the things that Joseph Campbell says is that if you get on the road, and once you're on the road, you always find the allies. They always show up. So just think about the most important thing you ever accomplished in your life and ask yourself, did I do that completely alone? Or did allies show up and help me make this happen? We are providing intentional allies for people. We are putting people into a team of others who are going to be there for them as the wildness begins on this adventure of getting out of poverty. I met a woman, she was a program officer up at the George Gunn Foundation in Cleveland. I came up to her and I said, we have got the first step figured out all over the state of Ohio, but we do not have a second step. I mean, we can provide a certain amount of support immediately, but we don't know what to do next. And then I rambled on about stuff, blah, blah, blah. She, years later, was on my board of directors of this group called the Ohio Center for Family Development and said to me, when you first came in, I had no idea what you were talking about, but that enthusiasm, I thought it could do something, so that's why I funded you. I said, I don't know if that's a compliment or not, but she got me money over at the Cleveland Foundation, down at the GAR Foundation, the roadway people gave me money, and we built this network, and we had 23 counties in Northeast Ohio trying to figure out the second step, and along comes allies from Iowa. They had created the Family Development Program. It's the precursor to Circles. It was go to the home, make a relationship, and help people get a plan out of poverty. We worked with 800 families in Ohio. It was fantastic, lasted 4 years. However, there were their trials and tribulations. It's just part of the deal. And sustaining that work was impossible. We had a lobbyist full-time down in Columbus trying to get the state to agree to keep funding this. The foundations were in it for 3 years, and we were at the end of the 3 years, and we were trying to get the state to buy this. And we could prove that everyone made progress, and it only cost $3,000 a year to get this to happen, and the state said, we're only spending $1,000, period. And we got stuck. So the Casey Foundation comes along from Baltimore to Iowa and figures out there's something neat in Iowa. I fly out there once I figure out where Iowa was. I got there, and we started what became known as Move the Mountain. This is about the time we met Clarence. Clarence is going to be speaking next here. And some 20 years ago, we realized that leaders were unable to engage the community. They would have a big event, have coffee and donuts, and only the staff are showing up. Where are the people? And how come we can't get people that are having the experience of poverty to the table? Move the Mountain got really good at bringing a lot of people with the experience of poverty to the planning table. We did this work in 14 different states. We worked with Clarence through the Office of Community Services, brought our ideas out to 14 states. And during this process, circles started showing up as an idea. So, fast forward now 10 more years later. I don't know how I had so many decades and I'm only 30. How did that happen? Circles USA got launched really in 2008. We just realized there are 40 communities doing this work. They needed a national association. They needed a book. Ruby Payne published this book with us. And that book it got into a lot of hands. And we were able to get Circles into what's now, we probably have launched some version of Circles in 120 places now. 80 of you are involved with the network right now. There's somebody in every state of the union talking to us about doing Circles. So we intend to be in all 50 states within the next decade. And I just went around and did Johnny Appleseed work. I talked to everybody. I was in every state at some point talking about Circles, and this network started to begin. So now, what is next? What is the next call? The mission of circles has always been to end poverty. So if you have that idea long enough, ideas will start to come to you. And the tipping point was one of these ideas. I realized that Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute had done this research that said, let's say there's 100 people, I think it's about 100 of us. If 10% of us were to hold a contrary idea to our whole network long enough, the whole network is going to adopt this idea at some point, if it's 10% of you. So 10 of you, that table and that table, if you were the champions of this idea that we could end poverty, the rest of the room was not convinced that could happen, if you just kept banging away at that long enough, it all shifts. They said that over their research, over and over and over again, it was always 10%. If there were only 9% of us doing it, it would take the age of the universe to get the rest of us to agree to that. But at 10%, it always happened. Isn't that interesting? I mean, it's just pretty fast. So I thought, we need to be in 10% of the counties in the US, 10% of the activity up in Canada. We need to be in 10% of these places, and they need to focus on getting 10% of the children and their families out of poverty. That symbolically could engage tipping points that are way beyond our imagination and reach. So how many agree that that's not a bad theory for beginning the end of poverty? I mean, is it more than 10% of us? It's like 60%. We're on our way. Good. Well, there's a new book. You all got a copy of it. I was talking to the Governor Association a couple years ago, somewhere in the Midwest, because it was the Midwest Governors Association. Maybe it was Kansas City. Anyway, this woman came up to me from Kansas who had been facilitating circles for a decade, and she said, I heard you talk 10 years ago, and the good news is your message is pretty much the same. We should and could end poverty. She said, and you're a progressive with a conservative accent. I said, I don't know what that means, but that's hilarious. What do you mean I'm a progressive with a conservative accent? She said, well, you're talking economic development. You're talking about the fact that we have to create jobs. You're talking about the fact that employers need to get talent out of their own community and work with people who are experiencing poverty now and get them ready for the workforce. You're saying that this is the time that both economic development goals and poverty reduction goals are the same. That's what I'm talking about. We need to write a book to introduce the fact that there is a shared end game. And what is it? It has 3 parts. One, whether you're a conservative, progressive, something in the middle like me, whatever, we all agree that people need to get to about 200% of the federal poverty level to get economically stable, right? In most of our communities, it could be more or less, but it's right around 200%. Look what happens in circles. The longer you can hold on to people's and support them on their vision of where they're going, the better the numbers get. We have data in our system now at 5 years showing that they're 228% better off than they were when they started. That's amazing. And notice that it goes up, it spikes pretty good at about 30 months. So all of this flash in the pan stuff that is funded by everybody for everything all over the country, nobody's got this kind of result. Why? Because they don't have the relationship part of this figured out. They don't know what happened to people because they never started they were in a transactional deal. They were not in a relationship. And this speaks, by the way, to all of you putting in the data forever. Just keep following people. If you need to pay them $25, $50 to sit down with you every 6 months, do it. But we need the data to show that not only do circles help people get to where they're getting to, but it helps them stay there and to keep advancing. Secondly, this cliff effect. Why does this come up for us? Because we're chasing 200%. Why isn't this well known? Because no one else, not a lot of people are chasing 200%. But when you chase this, bam, you know, if you looked at all the agencies in the federal and state system and said, you're only going to get paid prorated by the progress toward 200%, this cliff effect, it would be solved next Tuesday. If organizations can't get paid until they can move people towards 200%, this all goes away. But right now, that's not the case. We're getting paid to manage poverty, and we're managing programs, and we're looking at compliance issues, and all of that keeps the cliff effect in a mystery zone. So the third goal is to get this out to 10% of the communities and start planning to get 10% of some group out of poverty to engage these tipping points. Okay, there is no way to do what I just said without having this experience of leaving home. Look at the poverty in just one county in South Carolina. Tony and I pulled together a meeting with Methodist leaders from 78 churches in Greenville County. And they have agreed to get 10% of the kids out of poverty in their county. 78 churches are going to participate in this project. But that's Clemson Stadium, 81,500 people, right? That's how many people are in poverty. If you take a look at who is not yet at 200%, it's 2 of these stadiums full of people. We're talking to United Methodist. They got 23,000 members in Greenville County. Guess what? There's 23,000 kids in poverty in Greenville. For every member of their denomination, there is a child in poverty. So the urgency about this is really high. The believability that we can do something about it is really low. So what we're trying to do is come up with a plan, Tony and I, and the rest of South Carolina. Glad you're all here from Lexington. We got a big assignment. But we are going to create a very manageable plan that allows all the churches to participate with United Way and with Community Action and with a group called South Carolina Thrive, SC Thrive, to say, we're going to make this easier. We're going to make this more manageable. We're all going to take up smaller roles here, but this is going to help these kids out of poverty. So it's an everyday hero's journey, and this is the call to adventure, because Buckminster Fuller, another one of my favorites, said this. He said, you can never change things by fighting the existing reality to change something. You got to build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. That was our idea around circles, but now it's our idea around this. This poverty management system with this rickety-rackety bridge that we have all over the country is done. I'm going to predict that you cannot get funded 10 years from now, maybe even 5 years from now, if your program is not linked into a poverty reduction system. Do you know what I'm talking about? So if you look at, let's just take my own town of Albuquerque, $1 billion city budget. The biggest chunk of it is going to corrections, policing, and crisis intervention work. That's about 20% of the budget. You go over to stabilization, this is Medicaid, SNAP, all that kind of stuff, helps stabilize people. That's the state's biggest chunk of money. Then you go over to readiness for the workforce, community college, programs that don't have any other jobs ever happening in these programs. There's a lot of that predatory readiness stuff going on. But that stuff is a smaller piece of the pie. Then you go into placement. Fine, there's a certain amount of placement, but the placement agencies are only responsible for 9% of all the jobs being filled in this country. 9%. Everybody else is getting a job through networks like the ones we're creating. Then you get into advancement. There's like 8 people working there. I mean, there's nothing going on there. Advancement requires relationships, right? That's why we're in a unique space. So what I'm saying is, it's important to do the crisis intervention work, but it must be handed off over to stabilization, which must be handed off to readiness, which has to be handed off to placement, which has to be handed off to advancement. We're not done with families, in many cases, for 3 to 5 to 7 years. Would you agree? Especially people that have been raised in poverty. There's so much to be working through and to acclimate. So what we're saying is, what would it look like if we're in Kim's neighborhood now, down in Palm Beach County? They agreed to get 6,000 kids out of poverty in that county. They got 60,000 in poverty. So there's United Way, the Children's Coalition, the Community Service Program. There's $100 million worth of funders in the room and a bunch of agency directors. And they all said, yes, let's do that. Maybe the county will take 200 families a year for that. Maybe the city will take on 50, 100, maybe United Way do. But you break it down and say, own this. Own what it takes to get 200 families out of poverty. Start with your crisis intervention work, and now make it all make sense. Get all this synced up so that we can show at the end of the day that this huge system of money and people results in a reduction of poverty. Show us that. And every gap you experience, every service barrier that you experience needs to go to the planning team. They need to start thinking about solutions to this. Well, there is no way to do this without having transformational leaders at the helm here. And so we are going back to our roots at Move the Mountain, and we are creating a transformational leadership program. I just also got this book done. This book is based on some of the work we did with Move the Mountain in the early days, updated. And it allows a reader to go through and figure out, if I were to ask any of you, what is your non-negotiable the thing that is never going to change about why you're here on earth to make something happen. Each of you could reach down and begin to articulate that. That is what your call to adventure is. I asked this person in Washington, D.C. the other day, what's your non-negotiable? She said, ending poverty. And I looked at her and I thought, yeah, I believe you. I really do believe that that's the thing for you. So then I said, what's the thing I'd have to talk with you about for 2 straight years to get over between you and actually making that happen? And she said, figuring out how to get other people involved in that agenda. I said, there you go. That's your 2-year coaching assignment. And for everybody, it's different. Some other guy said it was focus. Another person said, I just am afraid of talking to people, about this. It seems like I'm going to get made fun of. Whatever it is, that is what's between us and getting this to happen. So we're going to create a series of leadership retreats. This is for groups that are ready to get serious about scaling. You need to send 2 people, top people, that are going to have the authority to bring the partnerships together and the funding and make this happen. At these retreats, which will be held in different parts of the country starting in the fall, we are going to be looking at how are you going to articulate your vision? We want a TED Talk version of this that we can videotape and critique with you. We want to know who are the partners you're going to pull in. I'm not talking about we should get partners like this and we should get I'm talking about who are the tens, the people that want to make this happen, that share this non-negotiable vision with you. Bring them into the kitchen. The rest, send a newsletter to them. But you don't want the obstinate people in the kitchen fighting with you on this. You want your shared valued visionaries with you making this happen. Our regional centers that we're going to set up in this next phase are going to be known as leadership centers because we are supporting people to get that vision out there and then figure out who you're going to partner with and then figure out what they have to learn. What are you going to learn? What's the new metrics? Well, we're chasing 200%. We're chasing a 10% reduction. The data isn't organized like that out in our communities, but it will be when we get done with this. Then we're going to embed it. What does that mean? It means that now, if we all get hit by buses today, it still goes on. There's a next generation of leaders that take it up. There's new policies and there's new structures, the whole bit. We get to go back to Kansas. So, I'm saying if we actually do this, everyone, and everyone makes the commitment that was made in Palm Beach, that was made in Greenville last month, we will get 1 million children out of poverty, and this is going to rattle the status quo in this country. So I am asking you to seriously consider that, because you ask yourself, who else is carrying and shepherding and stewarding this vision for this country? If you come up with somebody, we need to know who that is and bring him in as a partner. But right now, I'm telling you, it's us. It's us to take responsibility for this. It's us to figure out how to do this. And it's us to just keep holding on to the idea that this could happen. This country is so rich, we are so loaded with money and talent and resources. To maintain poverty is ridiculous. It is a ridiculous old notion. It needs to go. It is the Wicked Witch of the West. Thanks, everybody.